England at this time was governed by dynamic and stylish people. Henry's reign wasn't without its problems, but he had all the energy and intelligence you could wish for in a ruler, and he was married to one of the most stylish and influential women ever to have lived, the beautiful Eleanor of Aquitaine, who also happened to be the richest woman in Europe. England during this period was, of course, a feudal country. Loyalty was to your lord, not to your country. Tenure of property descended in established order from the crown, who owned all the land, through the great nobles to the minor lords and knights, and down eventually to the peasants who worked the land and turned out to fight for their landlords as and when required. Everyone derived seisin, or possession of land, from someone else, and it was in the interests of the overlord to ensure that his labourer was housed and fed. At the same time, the power of community created an interdependence where everyone had their place and had to pull their weight for the good of all. This meant that the basics of life were generally provided. Ariadne, a 13-year-old friend of mine, once asked me what homeless people ate at this time, and it struck me that the homeless didn't really exist then. Yes, there were outlaws who lived in the forest for various reasons, mostly to do with evading the law, hence their name, but even they tended to band together to make life easier. The fact is that labour was a valuable asset, not to be wasted or starved. This became even more the case in the mid-14th century, when over a third of the population was wiped out by the Black Death. To an extent, the Church stood apart from this feudal culture. Its primary allegiance was to the Pope, not to the King, and it wielded huge power, holding dominion over people's souls, and with the power of anathema and excommunication that could refuse baptism, marriage, absolution of sins, and funeral rites, and consign men to hell. Yet it was also deeply embedded in society, providing home and food not just for monks and friars, but many lay brothers. It was, moreover, a substantial employer. As we will see later, once the Church's control was shattered by the Reformation, homelessness erupted. Another group that lay a little outside feudal society was that of the steadily growing livery companies and the guilds of the nation's cities, which controlled the governance of trades from goldsmiths to butchers and street cleaners. They too, however, had responsibility for employment, and so for the individual's welfare. Towns and cities at this time were small affairs. Of the 2 million people who lived in England at the time the Domesday Book was compiled in the late 11th century, perhaps only 10% could describe themselves as urban dwellers. Winchester, the second largest city in the country, had a population of probably no more than 6,000. Norwich, York and Lincoln contained perhaps 5,000 inhabitants each. As for London, described proudly by William Fitzstephen in the late 1170s as head and shoulders above other cities in the world, this could boast around 10,000 citizens, a handful less than the population of, say, Cranley in Surrey today. Nevertheless, towns and cities continued to expand throughout the Middle Ages to become major centres of trade and wealth. I will talk about the ways in which the national diet developed during Henry II's reign a little later. For the moment, let's focus on the basics. The staple fare that people in medieval England would have access to. For most, that meant only what could be grown or reared locally and what happened to be in season. Opportunities to buy food from further afield would have been few and far between, as well as outside the budget of most. For the wealthy, things were a little different. The king and the great lords could move around the country from estate to estate so as not to devour all the provisions in one place. Their households, from the highest born to the lowliest scullions, would move with them, so being assured of their next meal. It must have been quite a sight, up to several hundred people making their way along the inadequate roads to the next place of sojourn, their ox carts creaking with everything needed for the journey, carpets, wall hangings, cooking pots, undercloths waxed against the rain and secured with rope. Nevertheless, the basic building blocks of their diet, like everyone else's, were seasonal, except where food could be preserved by salting, drying, and preserving in fat, oil or wine. Much reliance was placed on the living larder. After all, food is much fresher if you keep it alive until the last moment.